very much, and welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, Questions and Answers, live with the CAN-Do experts. My name is Ann Lee, and I am the Programs Associate for CAN-Do Multiple Sclerosis, and I'll be your moderator for this evening's webinar. If you don't already know who we are, CAN-Do MS is a provider of lifestyle empowerment programs for people living with MS and also their support partners. Our programs empower people to move beyond their MS by giving them the knowledge, skills, tools, and confidence to adopt healthy lifestyle behaviors, actively co-manage their disease, and to live their best lives. You can learn more about these great programs that we provide by going to our website at www.mscando.org. You can register for upcoming webinars. You can also view archived webinars that have been previously recorded. And you can learn about our in-person programs that we have to offer. We have our 4-day CAN-Do program, our 2.5-day Take Charge program, and our 1-day program called Jumpstart. You can also search and connect with us on social media. Please find us on Facebook, like us, and you'll be able to find up-to-date information regarding any of our upcoming events and programs. You can also connect with us on Twitter and also find us on LinkedIn and Pinterest. And please also search for us on YouTube, as we have a lot of fun videos that you can view on our YouTube page. We are especially excited about this evening's program. This is our first webinar dedicated solely to answering your questions. In the last several weeks, CAN-Do MS has asked for and gathered questions from the public, and our panel of experts has worked very hard to choose about 10 to 12 of these questions that are on various different topics to answer this evening. We will also save about 15 minutes towards the end of our webinar to answer any of questions that you might have that you'd like to ask our panel. And so as our operator had described earlier, if you do have a question, you can chat them to me or to the presenters through our chat feature. So on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you should see a little chat box. It says Chat with Presenters, so you can just type your question in there and send them to us, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. Please keep in mind that the webinar is being recorded and it will be archived on our website. And because it is being recorded, all telephone lines have been muted. I'd like to now introduce our experts for this evening's webinar. Juliann Hanson-Zlatev has been an occupational therapist for 18 years. Over the past 15 years, she has specialized in neurological and neurodegenerative diagnoses with an emphasis on stroke recovery, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's disease symptom management, and Huntington's disease. Juliann currently owns a private practice in Castle Rock, Colorado, and enjoys working with individuals to achieve movement and balance in their daily lives. Dr. Jones graduated from Wake Forest University School of Medicine in 2003, and he completed neurology residency at the University of Massachusetts in 2007. He completed an MS fellowship at the University of Massachusetts as a clinical fellow of the National Multiple Sclerosis Society in 2008. Dr. Jones is currently an assistant professor of neurology at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. And lastly, Debora Miller is a member of the professional staff at the Mellon Center for Multiple Sclerosis Treatment and Research of the Cleveland Clinic. She is also Associate Professor of Medicine at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine of Case Western Reserve University. Her PhD is from the Case Western Reserve University School of Applied Social Sciences. Dr. Miller's practice interests focus on marital and family adjustment to the consequences of multiple sclerosis, and she has lectured nationally on all these subjects. So as you can see, we have a very accomplished panel of experts to answer our questions this evening. So let's just dive right in to our first question. Our first few questions will be dealing with the topic of coping with MS. And Deb, I believe this first question is for you. How do I handle and cope with knowing that I am going to live with MS for the rest of my life?
And this is a question that, as I understand it, comes from a person who's in her 20s and relatively recently diagnosed. And receiving the diagnosis of MS can be quite unsettling for anyone at any age. But what is important to know is that there are different points along the continuum of life with MS when a person will go through a grieving process related to changes in their life that comes with a realization that MS is a part of their life. The key to managing this realization is to realize that it's only a part of your life and that there's much in a person's life that remains very much as it was before the MS. And it's very important to find a place for MS in a person's life without making it the focus. As I said, this is particularly common with newly diagnosed individuals, but it may happen at various times during the disease, such as during exacerbations or when you're facing other life challenges.
Great, thank you. And so our next question is, I am struggling with a general weakness and instability in one of my legs. It is progressively getting worse, and though I am working at keeping it strong, it is getting weaker. I get frustrated with the work I am doing not having any effect. Do I keep working at it, or do I give up? How can I tell when I have reached the point of diminishing return? And so, David, I think if you can start with this question, that'd be great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ann. This is a great question, and I certainly commend the person that questioned it, because there are many people with MS that have been told or do not exercise, and certainly deconditioning can be a big issue. One of the questions is, it seems that the MS is getting worse, and I don't think that's actually because of the exercise. But it's important to be aware that people should not overdo it, and it is possible to do too much, bringing on issues with fatigue, bringing on issues with overheating, and the like. It's been well known for many years that patients with multiple sclerosis will have worsening of their symptoms when they get overheated in the setting of fever, in the setting of infection, in the setting of increased ambient temperature in the room and the like. Indeed, in the 70s, some people were diagnosed with MS by being put in a hot tub, and the folks that couldn't get out had MS. So I would definitely keep working at it, but realizing that slow, gradual increases in physical activity are important, and trying to go from inertia to being a marathon runner in a short period of time is detrimental in MS. And certainly for whenever people are either at the beginning of the disease or the end of the disease, there's always a role for exercise in multiple sclerosis. Juliann, I think you had further comments?
Yes, indeed, and this is an excellent question, and it's one that I think a lot of people that I have seen have struggled with. And again, when I read through the question for the first time, the first question that popped up into my mind was, how intensely are you working, the person who asked the question? And it might be, the first suspicion that popped into my mind was that perhaps the exercise regimen at the moment for you is just a little bit too intense. And this might be a time when it's appropriate to scale back the exercise program while keeping the exercise program in that sort of mindset of less is more. And the reason I say that is that you're noticing that there really does seem to be a diminishing return effect for you. It's been well documented that fitness is really important for all of us, but especially important if you have MS. And there's some wonderful neuroprotective properties to exercise. So it really does need to be a strong priority. I would recommend specifically to have you look up a physical therapist that is versant in MS and symptom management, and go over your routine with them. There are about 3 components to an exercise routine. There's flexibility, strengthening, and aerobic capacity. And it might be that you need to tweak that routine a little bit so that maybe you're doing more flexibility and a little less strengthening, or you're pacing the strengthening a little differently. So getting some direct input on what you're doing and how you're doing it might really change that equation around for you. And Deb, pass it on to you.
Thanks very much, Juliann. I think that one of the biggest sticking points for people who are living with MS and its variability is the mindset that if you don't keep doing things the way that you've always done them, it is in some ways giving up. So while, as both David and Juliann have pointed out, exercise is a crucial point, is a crucial aspect of living with MS, regardless of where you are in the disease process. It may be that the exercise routine that you've done in the past may need to be modified, that if you were an aggressive runner in the past, that you may need to move to a somewhat less impact-oriented exercise, perhaps to water exercise. What we want to focus on as we make these adjustments is to keep a focus on what we want to do, what's important to us. A lot of times exercise means much more than just breaking a sweat. Sometimes it means being with friends, or it means having a chance to really get into a zone. And there can be other ways to spend time with your friends or to be in that zone that aren't exactly the way that you used to. So look for new ways to exercise, to get those three aspects of exercise into your routine, but to not have to do it exactly the way you used to.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Our next topic for questions is on drug therapy. So, David, I believe this next question is for you. And the question is, should I consider switching to oral MS medications if my Copaxone seems to be keeping my MS under control? It sounds like this person would like to no longer take shots.
And certainly this is a great question I hear almost daily in my clinic, and I would agree that almost everybody thinks it would be nice to no longer take shots, as I would feel as well. But there are several issues to consider. We now have 10 FDA-approved therapies for multiple sclerosis in the United States. Not everybody responds to every therapy, and every medicine has the potential for side effects. And so if somebody MS is indeed under control, there are some risks with switching therapies. The one risk is they may not respond as well to the next therapy that is chosen, and the other is they may have a lot more side effects with the new medication that they didn't have with the Copaxone. Copaxone and the injectable medicines have a long track record, all being approved initially in the 1990s. The oral medicines have been out for 3 years or less, and so the long-term safety issues just aren't there. So if somebody is tolerating and seemingly responding well to their injectable medicine, I would be reticent to make a switch. There's an old adage that says, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Great. Okay, so our next topic for questions is on mobility, and we had quite a few questions come up on this topic, and so we're hoping to be able to answer as much as we can through these next few questions. My ability to enjoy going to fairs, walks with friends, family vacations, grocery shopping, and or doing anything else is getting very troublesome. I can walk, but after walking about an hour, my legs and upper thighs hurt so badly that I have to sit down for short spells. After I sit for a while, I am able to go again for about an hour and then sit down again. If I don't sit down, then my legs begin to go numb and a burning sensation takes over, making walking any at all unbearable. And so, David, if I can have you just comment on this first. She's asking, what can she do, and is this part of their MS?
So certainly this is a great question that could be interpreted in several different ways. One of the possibilities, depending what the level of conditioning of the individual is this a problem with the conditioning? Folks that know me know I'm not the most active person I should be, and certainly if I were to decide to start jogging or climbing stairs, I may find that my legs hurt a lot just because it's more than my legs are doing. The other possibility that could be, given the length of time that symptoms occur, is does this represent a heat sensitivity, as we mentioned after the first question? There are many people with multiple sclerosis that will find when they get overheated in the setting of fever, infection, increase in ambient temperature, or exercise that they have some worsening of their disease. The reason I think it would be reasonable for this person in this question to be evaluated by their neurologist is also to make sure that the thought is that this is indeed MS and not issues with a vascular problem in the legs. One of my frustrations in clinic is sometimes when a patient has MS, everybody, the patient, the family, and the other healthcare providers assume that everything that a patient with MS feels is directly related to their MS, which may indeed not be the case. The final observation I would make, not being able to see the walking, is there something, is there some abnormality in the walking that is leading to this? Is there an abnormal hip hike, or is there some changes in the joints, perhaps directly related to the MS, that is leading to a lot of other symptoms? But I think Juliann may speak more about that as well.
Right, and I absolutely concur with David about that. It's well worth having an examination and having your neurologist take a look, and then that neurologist may refer you then to a physical therapist who can have a closer look and see what is going on. The first thing that when I read this question I thought about was pacing skills. And pacing skills are a part of fatigue management. That's a really important piece of managing MS symptoms. And pacing, I'll have to tell you, is probably one of the trickiest things to really nail down solidly. As a result of that, I would recommend a couple of things. For a starter, it might be helpful to get some information about fatigue management in general. And we do have archived webinars about fatigue management on the CanDo website. And also it might be useful to sit down with an occupational therapist in an outpatient clinic and talk about how you're managing your fatigue in general, and then in specific that might be helpful in addressing these symptoms. For a very concrete piece of evidence, of suggestion, I would say about every 30 minutes of the walking that you're describing, sit down. So before the symptoms become problematic or begin to raise their head, sit down and take a rest break every 30 minutes, about 2 to 5 minutes in duration. And that way you are absolutely resting the muscles that we're doing the standing and the walking. And it might give you a little more longevity in what you're doing. And then again, I would echo David in saying, is there something else going on that might be contributing to this? Could it be that the way that you're walking because of stiffness in your muscles or weakness in your muscles, it might be helpful to have a cane to help support your legs and help support your walking? Maybe not, and maybe so. And then the other thing would be, are there some tightness issues or some decreased flexibility issues going on in your legs that might be helped very much by having a good flexibility program in place. So Deb, how about you?
I'd also like to emphasize the concept of perspective about pacing, because the person who asked this question was really emphasizing that the walking was associated with activities that they enjoyed doing with other people. And it's perhaps time to step back and change perspective about what you are wanting to accomplish during these various activities. And walking fast may not be the most important part of those activities. Sitting down and taking a rest, as has been suggested, may be an opportunity to have a more extended, casual conversation with the people that you're going to the fair with. A great opportunity for people watching. I'm sorry. And again, it's a question of being able to adjust what you would expect of yourself. You don't ever want to stop doing something that is important to you and meaningful. It's important to continue to do those activities, but to perhaps do them in a slightly different way, or accomplishing less or enjoying more. The analogy we use is, why would you use a handheld egg beater to whip meringue when you've got a beautiful electric KitchenAid sitting on your stove that can do that work in the same amount or accomplish the same thing in half or a quarter of the time? So if what you want are gloriously whipped eggs, that could be comparable to spending time with your friend and really having a chance to catch up. And you don't need to walk 10 miles to do that. You might walk 2 miles and sit for 20 minutes.
Great point. Thanks, Deb. So our next question on mobility is, I recently started having problems with heavy legs. They're heavy, which is causing my walking problems. So David, what can she do or he do to stop this problem?
Well, thank you, and I think this is a great question. And my biggest concern is the word "recently" in that question, which would suggest this is a relatively new change, which certainly could suggest that if this indeed is a multiple sclerosis problem, perhaps the current disease-modifying therapy is not holding the disease at bay, or something is seemingly changing with the MS. But once again, as we discussed before, we need to make sure that this indeed is an MS problem and is not another issue, perhaps not directly related to multiple sclerosis. So I think the first step in this would be to see the neurologist, see a physician, and really assess, is the multiple sclerosis worse? And if it is, that could be treated in the short term and in the long term. And often if there are changes in the walking, the services of a physical therapist and some rehabilitation is often in line. Certainly this is something for which a patient, this patient in particular, should seek care, and it is not something that should be managed without an expert medical opinion. I think Deb had some further comments on this as well.
Well, David, as you alluded, there are many possible causes for this heaviness that the person is experiencing. And not all of those causes are necessarily related to multiple sclerosis. So I'm taking this opportunity to emphasize the importance of having a general practitioner as well as an MS specialist as part of your care team. If you really want to have good general health care, it's essential that a primary care physician or a primary nurse practitioner be part of your care team to make sure that your general health, including other possible causes of this heaviness, are being considered. And if it is disease progression, I really think it's very important to take time to recognize that there may be changes in your functional ability, and to emotionally and physically prepare yourself and your family for the transitions that you may be facing, so that you can continue to function in ways that are important to you, but, and I know I'm sounding like a bit of a broken record, by doing that somewhat differently. We say that no one ever accepts multiple sclerosis, but we do encourage people to adjust to the changes that accompany it.
Great, thanks, Deb. It sounds like there's a real theme going on here with having to adapt your lifestyle to being able to work through the issues and problems that people are having with mobility.
It's
so
really important to not let these changes gain control over you. You need to control them.
Great. So we have one final question on mobility, and this was asked by a support partner, a wife. So she says, my husband, who has primary progressive MS, does not walk anymore. And so David, what do you think? Should her husband still continue to go to PT twice a week, even if they're unable to walk?
So before answering that, I'd like to at least say a couple words about primary progressive MS, because there are some misconceptions, and this may be a term that not everybody is aware of. About 10 to 15% of people with MS have a form called primary progressive, with a slow, gradual worsening issues as opposed to relapses. And typically it involves the spinal cord, and typically there are issues with walking and what we call spasticity, which colloquially is defined as stiffness in the legs, but more specifically is velocity-dependent resistance to muscle stretch. And just because folks do not walk anymore does not mean that there is no function left. And there are lots of things that can be done for folks to maintain some function, whether it be maintaining ability to transfer independently, whether it be maintain ability to toilet independently, being able to use power mobility or wheeled mobility aids and the like. So I think that for all of these reasons, physical therapy is beneficial, because there are still things to do. There still is function to maintain, irregardless of whether somebody is walking or not. Sometimes it can be very active, and sometimes the stretching exercises and other things that may be deemed as more passive can be very beneficial throughout the realm of MS, from the very beginning to the very end. And I suspect Juliann has more feelings on the rehab perspective in primary progressive MS in this individual patient.
Absolutely. Thanks, David. Again, I would reiterate that exercise is so incredibly important for overall health and also for overall comfort level. When you have, whether it doesn't matter what kind of MS you have, primary progressive or otherwise. Specifically, when I think about your husband, I think about his comfort in sitting in a wheelchair for the majority of the day, which when people are no longer walking, that tends to be where they are. So a flexibility program is really critical for him to be able to be comfortable, to be able to dress and shower and transfer, as David had mentioned before, all with more ease and comfort. So those are all things that rehabilitation can help provide, and it's very, very well worth it. The other thing I was hopeful that he is able to do by going to a program twice a week is to do a little bit of weight bearing on his legs. That's also important for overall physical health, but also for overall mental health as well. And so it's important to go ahead and continue to nurture the health of your entire body, even if one part isn't used as often as it used to be. And also a final word about aerobic capacity. Arm bikes, there are lots of ways to modify exercise so that someone can still get an aerobic exercise, and enough can't be lauded about the swimming pool. People who aren't really using their legs to walk can exercise their legs in a pool sometimes, and it just feels wonderful to them to be able to move them. But I also know that Deb has more perspective on this, and I turn it to you.
Thanks very much, Juliann. I tend, in this role for this question, to be the wet blanket of reality. And the fact of the matter is that most insurances do not cover physical therapy or occupational therapy on an ongoing basis for individuals who are not showing active improvement in their condition. Insurance companies are geared towards goals that lead to improvement, and for the most part, and it's a very important part, the work that you're talking about with your husband is to maintain function. And insurance may not pay for that, so that people can become quite frustrated that their physical therapist says, I'm sorry, but we don't have an active plan to progress your functioning. And sometimes it's the physical therapist or the occupational therapist who really receives the brunt of the frustration that you reasonably experience. But what they're trying to convey is that it's potential that you could continue to receive therapy but not be covered by the insurance company. And that can be a devastating blow. MS is an incredibly expensive disease. And to the extent possible, you want to avoid expenses that you know are not going to be covered. For that reason, oftentimes physical and occupational therapists will recommend that family members become part of the exercise team, and that they accompany the person with multiple sclerosis to learn the exercise routine and to continue that routine at home on a routine basis with occasional checks back with the physical or occupational therapist to make sure that the exercises are being done correctly and to advance the program as is appropriate. We also recognize that it may be asking too much for a spouse or a young child to do these routine daily stretching exercises without the benefit of a physical therapist. But many multiple sclerosis societies have respite programs that allow for provision of an assistant to come into the house at least occasionally to help with these exercise routines. But if by chance you get the message from your physical therapist or occupational therapist that they are not able to continue ongoing twice-a-week therapy, please understand that it's not because of their lack of desire to help you, but because of insurance constraints. And that in every case that I've ever known, those physical therapists and occupational therapists will work with the family to devise a program that allows them to continue these exercises at home on their own with intermittent monitoring. Juliann, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you read my mind. Thank you.
Sure.
Often, since I'm an outpatient, we will work with local exercise clubs, and there will be exercise physiologists or trainers that are very good and willing to learn about MS, and so they can carry on the job of a routine and a program very admirably and very well, and that gets you out of the house and gets you involved in doing something else, and it can be a part of a social organization that you can be in, and you can get the benefits of all of those things. I also had a client once who was a very active member of her church. And so women from her church would come over every morning and help her with her flexibility and exercise program. And so it was a great way for her church to give back to her, and she did things for them. So there's a lot of ways to problem solve this. I would encourage you to really turn the box inside out and look at all the options you have for this. Should that happen, the term maintenance comes up, and skilled therapy has to come to an end. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. So before we move on to our next topic, I do just want to remind everyone that, please feel free to chat any questions that you have on any topic. As you can see, our experts are skilled in answering all of these questions as best as possible. So please feel free to chat your questions to me, and we'll try to get to them at the end of the webinar. So our next topic of questions is on emerging therapies and research. And again, this is a question about primary progressive MS. Dr. David, are there any new drugs coming out for primary progressive MS?
So there is a lot of research going on, and I think one of the really exciting things, both Deb and I were at a huge MS meeting last week in Copenhagen, at which there were, I think, over 7,800 participants and over 1,000 scientific presentations. And seemingly the number of presentations on progressive MS is increasing. And there are several ongoing trials right now, some that are getting closer to completion and the others, including trials with Juliann in primary progressive MS, including with Tysabri in progressive and secondary progressive MS, including with a drug called ocrelizumab, which is in phase 3 trials for relapsing and progressive MS. There's a trial just starting with ibutalas through the NeuroNext program for all forms of progressive MS and the like. So even though as yet we do not have proven drugs for primary progressive MS, there is a lot of research that is going on. We continue to try to solve this problem. There are task force and international groups of neurologists that are trying to deal with this aspect of multiple sclerosis that we have, as of yet, not had as much breakthrough in. So I think the future is bright. Not close enough yet that I can say when or what, but certainly there's a lot of activity that's ongoing.
Great. Sounds very promising. And the next question, again, or I'm sorry, David, I think, David, sorry, this question is for you as well. What progress on stem cell research related to MS has been made?
So certainly stem cell research is an interesting topic that is very exciting for folks, and research is being done in MS through several different realms. The one we're furthest along is in what we call bone marrow transplant in an attempt to reset the immune system. This is a procedure that is being done in some centers experimentally. It comes with a fair amount of risk, but has some potentially exciting results. But research is still very early on. There's also work being done with the mesenchymal stem cell group, which is involved with using mesenchymal stem cells to protect and potentially inhibit the immune response and perhaps even initiate repair in patients with multiple sclerosis. But that is still in quite early trials. And there is an interesting molecule that's being studied by Biogen IDEC. It's in phase 2 trials now, or soon will be. We actually know that there are stem cells, oligodendrocyte progenitor cells, at the borders of an MS lesion. And for some reason, they do not seem to get activated, and we're not sure why. We have found one molecule or a group of molecules that seem to inhibit these cells from becoming active, and this is a drug being developed to potentially block that inhibition and hopefully activate some of a patient's own stem cells. Certainly, there are lots of internet reports about being able to get stem cells injected overseas. Certainly, this is something that I have lots of safety concerns about. This is something that we don't have a lot of efficacy data on. And often these are things that are not paid for by insurance and have a significant financial impact to patients. Sometimes when we have patients that are desperate, They are willing to take some risks that may not be completely reasonable. And I think Deb is going to talk about some of those psychological aspects of this further.
Yes, thank you very much, David. I don't at all intend to de-emphasize the importance of stem cell research with my comments, but MS remains a disease with no known cause or cure. And many people feel that traditional medicine that they receive in their doctor's office may not provide a complete overview of the way to approach treatment. And many people are invested in alternate treatments that may not be recommended by their primary health care profession or their neurology specialist. I apologize. Our general approach to beyond what we call CAM, because complementary and alternative medicine is certainly an accepted part of MS treatment at this point. But there are some treatments that go beyond complementary and alternative medicine that have a potential negative effect on a person's overall well-being. In general, the approach that we as MS specialists take towards any kind of complementary alternative or perhaps even a more aggressive treatment that you engage in related to your MS should be shared with your physician. Hopefully you have a relationship with your physician or your nurse specialist or physician's assistant to share with them that while you're following their treatment regime, there are other avenues of intervention that you're following. This is incredibly important to discuss with your healthcare team because it can have impact on the medications that they're prescribing for you. And while we certainly don't claim to have total knowledge about what is true and best for multiple sclerosis treatment, I think that the practice that most of the people associated, the professionals associated with can-do MS practice have undergone rigorous evaluation under experimental conditions. Should you decide to follow some other line of treatment that may not have had the same level of experimentation and testing, I think it's really important, as I said, to discuss with your clinical team what it is that you're pursuing in terms of treatment and to be wary of the cost of those alternative treatments. The drugs that we're prescribing are expensive enough, and they have undergone FDA approval so that there's some evidence behind them. I would just encourage anyone who's trying expensive, non-tested therapies to be really open to discussing their potential therapeutic value of those treatments with their clinicians and with other people with MS who may have attempted those therapies and found them to be beneficial or not. So, David, that's my add-on to your very straightforward answer.
Wonderful.
Great. Thank you. So moving on to our next topic of relapse. David, this question is also for you. How do relapses change over time, and do they become more frequent the longer the person lives with MS?
So there are two different processes that we define in MS. There's the inflammatory component to the disease, and there's what we call the degenerative component to the disease. But to be fair, we don't know as much about the degenerative component, and I saw last week Bob Fox use the term something else, which may be more accurate for our understanding of that. Relapses actually become less frequent as the course of the disease goes on, as people transition from more of a relapsing phase to more of a progressive phase. I think it's important to define a relapse. By definition, it's over 24 hours of new or worsening symptoms that occur in the setting, in the absence of fever or infection, and are preceded by 30 days of relative neurologic stability. So sometimes folks, when they feel that they are getting worse, they use the word relapse, but the word progression may be more appropriate. So no, indeed, relapses tend to become less frequent the longer that people live with multiple sclerosis.
Great, that's interesting. Thank you, David. And the next question again for you is, do functional changes occur accordingly, as in more cognitive changes will occur with the longevity of the disease, and do relapses increase with age?
So everybody with MS is different, Anne. There are some people that only have significant physical changes, and there are others that only have significant cognitive changes. For every, quote, rule in MS, I can think of several or many exceptions. So the cognitive changes can occur early, they can occur late, or they can occur at the same time as some of the other changes. Certainly, as all things in MS, they can get worse with the longevity of the disease. Relapses, as we talked, they tend to occur more frequently early in the disease, and as folks get into the progressive phase of the disease, there may be some slow, gradual worsening in multiple symptoms, including cognitive symptoms. Certainly for many of these issues, rehabilitation is important, and I think Juliann was going to speak further about that.
Yes, thank you. The thing I wanted to stress on this was anytime you have symptoms that are interfering with your daily life and how you perform your activities in your daily life, it's a good idea to get some support for yourself. So there are a host of all kinds of strategies that you can use if you do have cognitive issues. And it's helpful to define exactly what's going on. A lot of people will talk about having memory problems when in fact they're having trouble with processing problems. So it's helpful, I would make the recommendation, if those things are issues and you're struggling with them, to get some support, to see an occupational therapist or a speech therapist for cognitive changes. They can provide you with a wealth of information, and to just be very proactive about how you manage how your daily life is impacted.
Great. Thanks, Juliann, for that perspective. So moving on, our next topic is on secondary progressive MS. And the question is, I was just told that my MS has advanced from relapsing and remitting MS to secondary progressive. What exactly does this mean, and what are some of the things that I may experience? And I will throw this to you, David.
Well, thank you, Anne. This is an interesting question that we also frequently get. And I think the honest answer is I don't really know. We know that over time, people transition from more of a relapsing phase to more of a progressive phase, but it's really hard to know when that happens. And typically that may have happened a couple years ago or a year ago and the like. Our thought of this is that it goes from more of an inflammatory disease, like we talked about in the last question, to more of a degenerative disease, which we don't understand as well. Relapses tend to occur less frequently in secondary progressive MS. New lesions tend to occur less frequently in secondary progressive MS. And disability sometimes, or issues, symptoms tend to perhaps slowly get worse at different rates in different people. Like in the last question, everybody with MS is different, so the changes may be more rapid, the changes may be very slow, the changes may be more physical, the changes may be more cognitive. We're still doing a lot of research, and we still have much to learn about progressive MS, from what it is and how to treat it. Certainly, I think one of the important aspects of this question is, how do you deal with the emotional response of being told that a patient or that an individual is now secondary progressive MS? And I'd like to hand that over to Deb, because I think that's an important and frequent issue we deal with.
Thanks very much, David. As we know in our own practices, and as was emphasized at the international meeting that David mentioned that he and I had attended, it's really clear that we don't have a solid handle on exactly what secondary progressive multiple sclerosis is. This is a term that recently came into use within the MS community, and it's really emotionally laden for persons who have the disease. It means that they're no longer relapsing, remitting, that they've moved to the next phase of the disease. I can't overemphasize the fact that we really don't know what this means. I believe that most people are concerned about this designation because most of the medications that we have approved for the treatment of MS are for the treatment of relapsing remitting disease. And I would state that based on my survey of many neurologists, that the transition to secondary progressive indicates that a person is still having relapses and therefore are eligible for the available medications, so that they don't become ineligible for the available treatments. David, just very quickly, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that it's still possible to have relapses in secondary progressive MS. Many of our patients are on disease-modifying therapy, so it can be hard to know, are they not relapsing because they're on a disease-modifying therapy or because they're well into secondary progressive MS. So I think we don't have a marker for what this is. We don't have a marker for when this occurs. We don't really know what it is. So I think that it really is an area that we need to explore, and certainly it's not an indication that we absolutely have to stop therapy or need to change what we do.
Great, thank you. So coming to our last question, it's on heat. And this question, Juliann, we'll end with you answering this. The question is, what is available to help MS patients with heat while exercising at the gym?
All right, awesome question. Big issue and an important issue. So the first thing that I would say is, whatever you choose to manage heat while exercising, you're going to want to use it in your cool down phase after your exercise has finished. Our muscles continue to produce heat. And so to really fully discredit the heat's effect on you, that you want to keep the cooling device or cooling strategies on for another 10, maybe 20 minutes. The next thing I would say is that everyone is an individual, and everyone responds individually with their MS symptoms and with exercise. So some people, when they exercise, get really, really hot, and they really, really need to use multiple products to help keep their core body temperature cooler. Other people aren't as hot when they exercise, and so they can use fewer strategies or different strategies. So what I would emphasize on that is make it personal and use what works very well for you. There are a host of products out there, like I said. I won't belabor going into all of them, but there are vests, there are caps that have a cooling agent in the cap. There's neckerchiefs that you can wear. There are those really cool fans with misters that you can spray water on yourself and cool yourself off. There are wristbands and ankle bands and There are evaporative cooling vests that circulate cool fluid through them, and then there's a kind that have a cold pack that's activated by cold water and stays cold for about 2 hours. It depends upon what part of the country you live in. Typically, the kind of evaporative coolers work well in arid regions and not quite so well in the humid south. So that might be something you want to look into. For fun, I Googled cooling vests this afternoon, and there are a number of companies out there that have some really great looking products out there. But better yet, the National Multiple Sclerosis Society has already done some vetting of these products, and that's on their website. So if you go into their main website and you type in cooling vests, then a whole thing will pop up that talks about what they know about cooling vests and programs for maybe getting one if funds are tight. And they have vetted some of the companies and talked about what's good about this one and what you might want to consider. So with that, I will turn this back to Anne, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Juliann. And so I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, but I do want to address some of the questions that have come in. And so first, thank you so much to our panelists for thoroughly answering the pre-submitted questions that we just went through. And so this first question I'm going to throw to you, David. They ask, we had talked about some symptoms and effects that people have been experiencing, and that some of this may not be due to MS. So this person asks, what techniques does the doctor use to determine if this symptom is due to MS or not due to MS?
So I think part of it is people that see multiple sclerosis and see lots of people with MS. After a while, there are things that we hear that make us think whether something is due to MS or not. The other part is the physical examination. Can we see some evidence of neurological dysfunction that would explain the symptom? Can we see some evidence of other dysfunction, musculoskeletal, ligamentous injury? So I think it really is an evaluation of listening to what the patient says, examining the patient, and then making a determination. Sometimes when it's not so clear, the involvement of a rehab professional or sometimes exploration with an MRI or other testing can be necessary to prove whether something is or is not MS.
Great, thanks, David. And then we have another question asking, my doctor thinks I'm going from PPMS to RRMS. Is this possible? I've had PPMS for 9 years, and I started, excuse my pronunciation of this, but it says I started Tecfidera a few months ago.
So the pronunciation is Tecfidera, sorry, Anne, to make sure everybody is aware. So once again, the classifications we use for MS are perhaps somewhat flawed. And I know another member of the Can Do MS program, Dr. Randy Shapiro, talks a lot about you have MS. It doesn't matter what kind of MS you have. And I think that is very true. There are not good markers for the different types of MS. Certainly it is possible to have relapses during progressive MS. It's possible to have relapses during primary and secondary, or SPMS and PPMS, and the like. And sometimes we realize that the type of MS that we classified a patient has is the incorrect one. And I would kind of reiterate what several of us have said, or I think all of us have said during this talk, that the classification may not have the biological relevance that we think they have. And sometimes new information can change what kind it is. I suspect that the real reason that the term has been changed is that as you have more information and can prove there's a relapse, it can make it easier to obtain medication. Because as we discussed before, there are no approved therapies for PPMS.
Great, thanks. And we'll just go to one last question. And this question is about diet. This person says, one theory says to avoid foods that are acidic, such as citrus fruit foods, tomatoes, spicy foods. And another theory says, besides basically having a balanced diet, to include organic meats and veggies like kale. Do any of you experts know of any scientific research on helpful specific diets?
This is Deb, and I think that it has been very hard to isolate very specific aspects of diet that affect multiple sclerosis. But that in general, and I encourage my co-presenters to speak up, but that a traditional, healthy, Mediterranean-based diet is one that is considered generally healthful for the general population as well as for persons with MS, and that there are not necessarily any specific nutritional components that should be neglected or included in diet other than maintaining a healthful, balanced diet.
I concur with that.
I would completely agree with you, Deb. There is very limited data on certain diets in MS, but there's a tremendous number of things that are talked about on the internet, including the paleo diet, the swank diet, the MS best bet diet, the gluten-free diet, and the like. And the studies for these are at best very limited and usually essentially non-existent. I think a well-balanced diet is very appropriate. I kind of kiddingly tell many of my patients for a while the Atkins diet was a very popular diet for losing weight, and then I believe Dr. Atkins died of a heart attack. And I think there is really a message here that a well-balanced diet is important. And I think for many people, nutrition, diet, eating is a very important and a very enjoyable part of life. And so perhaps an occasional splurge with that thing that tastes so good but perhaps is not so good for you is psychologically uplifting.
I'll give a hallelujah to that.
Yeah, you're here.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jones and Dr. Miller and Juliann for answering all of our questions. I hope that we were able to cover a lot of different topics and that we were able to address a lot of questions that everyone on the webinar has had. So before we end, I just wanted to let everyone know that Can Do MS does have other resources on our website that you can access. We have an e-news archive, which is our e-news is a monthly news article that Can Do MS emails to our past participants and people that are interested in receiving mail from us. And the article features upcoming events and programs. We also have an Ask the Can Do team program on our website where if you do have other questions that you haven't been able to get answered, you can submit it online on our website and we'll forward it to our appropriate program staff, and we'll try to get those answered to you as soon as possible and even post them online for the public to see. We also have our Can Do library that is full of different library articles. They're short 350-word articles on specific topics in health and wellness that are written by our programs consultants. So feel free to peruse through there, and everything can be found on our website at mscando.org. Lastly, we have our 28th annual Autumn Benefit coming up on October 24th in New York at the Metropolitan Club. This benefit is our most elegant gala, and it's been devoted to celebrating the legacy of our founder, Jimmy Huga. And we honor an individual each year at the event who demonstrates that can-do spirit and who makes a significant contribution to improving lives of others with MS. This year we're honoring Clay Walker. He is a multi-platinum recording artist, and funds that are raised at the event will help support our programs. So please go to mscando.org/New York to reserve your seat today. And finally, our next month's program or webinar is on November 12th at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and the topic is on emerging therapies. And our presenter that evening is Dr. John Schaefer, neurologist. So please join us live from the convenience of your home or office at no charge to you. And for those participating live tonight, once the presentation is over, you'll see a survey pop up on your computer screen. Just take a few minutes to complete that survey and share your input. Your feedback always helps us to continue to improve our programs and our webinars. You will also receive a copy of tonight's webinar slides along with their answers and a recording of the webinar as well. So again, I thank you everyone so much for taking the time to join us this evening. I apologize that we've run a little bit later than scheduled. And again, thank you to our presenters and our experts for sharing your valuable knowledge to all of us. And I hope everyone has a great evening.